Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled People stories. What would you do if a neighbor parked 11 cars illegally on your property? Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled, Towing Revenge on My Ex. Some details are vague because while I feel ready to share this story, I still have PTSD flashbacks and anxiety fears of her popping up on my doorstep. So this happened about 5 years ago. My ex-wife and I were married for about 2 years and together for 5. Things were declining in our relationship badly, and well, my ex found another partner. I will call the new partner NP. Instead of just leaving or starting divorce proceedings, they decided that I needed to be the bad guy so they could ride off into the sunset or something. I have mental health issues that I was actively seeing a therapist for. I'm not saying she had to stay and deal with my mental health issues, but she gaslit, manipulated and used my mental health against me. A side effect of most of my mental disorders is poor short-term memory. She would regularly say things like that did not happen or I was remembering something wrong. My ex also had NP helping her as well. It was hard to tell what was up from down. They both were telling me that I was a horrible person and it was difficult to not believe it as it was already 2 versus 1, but they would also rope in mutual friends in as well. This caused me to spiral worse than I already was, even though I was already in therapy to try to get better. They put me down constantly, told me I was fat and unattractive, killing what little self-esteem I had left. My ex even told me one day that she had fallen out of love with me shortly after we got married. Everything hurt so much. Well, like any beaten dog, eventually I snapped and lashed out after a fight with my ex. It was one of the darkest moments of my life and she declared that we were done. She told me she was moving out shortly thereafter. I was at rock bottom. She moved out a month and a half later and removed herself off the lease at the beginning of the following month. My ex did not take everything with them, despite the fact that I didn't fight them. It was her stuff. More importantly, she left behind a $12,000 paperweight of a car she was still making payments on. Thankfully, at the time she got the car, I had seen how horrible the reviews were for that make and model, and I wanted nothing to do with it. So I refused to put my name on that vehicle. I ended up being right. It was not even a year after she got it, the transmission was destroyed and there it sat in the driveway. For some context, my landlord had a clause in our lease against broken down vehicles just sitting on the property, and the city did too. So I kept asking her when she was going to come get it, so I got the runaround. She'd say would come get it, then either went silent or pushed a day back. My ex even tried to convince me to lie and say it was mine. I flat out told her no, I didn't want to wind up in trouble for having a broken down car that was not even in my name. During this time I ended up befriending a neighbor who was determined to dust me off and get me back up on my feet. I will call her A. Well, between A and my therapist, they finally got through to me that I did not deserve any of this and that she needed to get her crap already. Now for the revenge. Weeks of going back and forth with her to come get her stuff. It was now over 30 days since my ex had been taken off the lease. The idea of her popping up whenever she wanted made me extremely anxious, and I vented to A. A pointed out that I could have the car towed, so I got an idea and we plotted together. I gathered up the last of her stuff from inside the house and put it inside the car, and then called the non-emergency police number to report an abandoned car. They sent someone out and got my info and some info off the car and then put a sticker on it. They say that the owner had 72 hours to remove it, or I could remove it. I warned my ex one last time that she needed to come get her car. There was only silence. 4 days go by and I still hadn't gotten anything from her to make plans to come get this stupid broken down car. Enough was enough. I called the tow company and had them come pick it up. The best part was, it was at her expense. She would have to pay them when she finally decided to do something about the car. So I filmed and took pictures while the tow guy loaded it up and sent it to my ex, giggling like a maniac the whole time. Once the car was gone, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't ever felt before. My ex had zero legit reason to return to my house. However, my phone was blowing up within the hour from my ex, who suddenly had plans to remove the car that she had neglected to fill me in on. Now bombarding me with angry texts stating that I was trying to ruin her life. I told her that I wasn't, that I had warned her repeatedly and she had ignored me, and all I wanted was to be left alone. If I was the bad guy, fine, I accepted that. I then blocked her and locked down all of my social media. I felt like I could finally begin to heal and move on with my life. Not gonna lie, it felt good to get some payback for the last 10 months she had made my life hell. And now let's continue to the title story, which is titled Neighbor Parked 11 Cars in Front of My House and in My Driveway. So here I am in my own little corner of a quiet suburban neighborhood where I live alone but have friends and family nearby that visit often. I've met my neighbors, though because everyone here is at least 30+ years older than me, I don't meet up with them for social gatherings much. One neighbor in particular, a man called Paul, is a constant pain in the ass. While I don't see him around so much, I do hear him quite often. Paul and his friends often have loud parties that continue long into the night with their trash left out over both our lawns the next morning. After a night of little sleep thanks to the rowdy party of Paul and his friends, I dragged myself out of bed and downed an energy drink. I hit the shower and threw on some semi-clean office attire as I got ready to head to work. Drawing back my living room blinds, I was expecting to be hit by blinding bright sunlight, but instead I got the ass end of a blue SUV blocking the whole window. I swung open the front door and found that the SUV had been parked across my yard, along with up to 10 other cars that were not mine, left across my yard and driveway like a neatly packed suitcase or Tetris puzzle. I would have been confused who left them here if not for a trail of empty beer bottles and cigarette stumps leading from the cars to Paul's house. The worst part about it was that they had boxed me in, so I could not even go to work and deal with this later. Paul was an unemployed bum, meaning he was perfectly happy to have parties midweek and sleep in until the afternoon before restarting the cycle. That did not sit right with me this time, so I kept pounding on his front door until I got a response. A few minutes later, the door creaked open to a very tired and annoyed-looking neighbor. From the alcohol on his breath, I expected he was either going through a terrible hangover or still drunk. Reining in my rage a little, I politely asked if his friends could move their cars, explaining that I was late for work and my car was stuck. He peered around the doorway to glance at the cars but gave no indication of remorse or understanding. He wore a permanent stare and blank, uninterested expression the whole time I was talking. When I was done, Paul shrugged and said that his friends were still out of it, but he could ask them later when they came to. I snapped in irritation, asking him to wake them so I can go to work again, but he did not take kindly to being told what to do. In a casually condescending tone, Paul reassured me that everyone missed work occasionally and I should just chill out more. When I interjected, he went on to say his friends would be staying a few more nights and began to shut the door, assuming I would have just let the matter go. I grabbed the door and held it open as I desperately argued for him to move their cars, pointing out what he was doing was illegal. Without a word, Paul shoved me away and slammed the door shut. Without a second thought, or maybe any thought, I called the police non-emergency line in hopes that they could encourage Paul and his company to move their cars off my driveway. The operator was very kind and understanding, though could not offer very much in terms of actual or immediate help. They were quick to agree that it was a crime, but getting a tow truck out to me was not going to be happening for a while. Glancing at my watch, I ended the call and had to call it quits for now. After calling for an Uber, I ended up getting to work an hour late, something that was not missed by anyone in the office. An uncomfortable few minutes later, I was called in to see my manager and explain my lateness. He sounded skeptical about my story and wanted me to not let it happen again, as if the morning was not bad enough, now my job was at risk too. Paul was gonna pay for this, and if the police were not gonna be much help, that meant it was all up to me. That night I could hear yet another party from next door. This time the noise continued onto my property as I assumed they returned to their cars. I eventually fell asleep somehow and woke up to find even more of a mess in my yard than the night before. It even looked like someone had started a small fire or barbecue. Part of my grass was scorched black and dead. This was already too much to deal with, so I called in sick at work. Now, I know it was a bad decision as a manager was already suspicious, but I needed time to focus on my troubles at home. After some hard digging, I found a few local tow companies that had availability today, so after making sure Paul and his buddies were busy, I put my plan into motion. I arranged for one tow truck to appear every hour, taking away a different car from my driveway to different impounds all across the city. To my surprise, the driveway was clear again before anyone noticed. It helps to get up early for revenge. I wrapped things up by stapling all 11 individual receipts to his front door with a note saying, "Missing something?" in big bold text. I made sure to leave off the addresses, leaving them with the extra work of having to call or visit each impound and search. I was looking forward to seeing what they made of this inconvenient treasure hunt. With peace of mind, I put some extra hours into work and smoothed things over with my manager, salvaging the job the drama nearly cost me. In my free time, I watched with glee as Paul's friends came by one to look for their missing cars and get increasingly annoyed at the effort. It's a good thing Paul was unemployed, as many of these visits took hours before he returned home again, only more tired and frustrated than the day began. I even overheard an argument one time between Paul and his friends swearing off their parties in the future after all this hassle that he had caused. I was very pleased to see karma returned in full. After getting their cars back, Paul's friends never returned, leaving this neighborhood pleasantly party and drama free. My driveway and yard are now undisturbed, though it took some time to get the tire tracks out of the mud and an afternoon of bitterly gathering the trash. Paul, by the way, doesn't bother me anymore. We haven't talked and he hasn't so much as looked in my direction since the towing incident. I'm sure by now he knows it was me, but seeing as it was illegal in the first place, I guess he's let it go. And the next one is titled, Got an Entitled Parker Towed. And by the way, Ripe Stars, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, because that would help me tremendously with the entitled YouTube algorithm. Honestly, sometimes this algorithm is worse than an entitled neighbor that parks on your property. Anyway, Friday night I came home from work to find someone on our block was having a large party and someone decided they were entitled to park in my driveway. Keep in mind, my driveway is a single car width lined with a retaining wall on both sides and a garage at the end. Essentially impossible for a tow truck to come pull them out without property damage. Seeing this and the lack of street parking, I took this as a cue to park right behind them in my driveway. Now, a few hours go by and their entitled parker is now knocking at my door demanding I move my car so she can leave. Seeing as they were demanding, I informed them that I'd been drinking and would not move my car. The entitled parker then decides to call the police to get them to force me to move. When the police knocked on my door, I was sure to grab a beer from the fridge before I answered to talk to the officer. I had informed him that after I got home I was unwinding and had been drinking and was in no shape to drive. At this point, their hands were tied because they could not tow her car out. I'm in no shape to drive and I'm legally parked in my driveway. I ended up telling the entitled parker that since it is a long weekend, I would be on a weekend-long bender and they could come move my car after I go to work on Tuesday. Update, I didn't expect this to blow up like it did. After the first few sightings of EP, it was a relatively peaceful weekend and I did a lot of diagnostic tests on liver performance. I contemplated the idea of working from home on Tuesday, but ultimately decided that I had enough fun with this and went to work. My neighbors said that they saw EP sheepishly come around 8 AM to retrieve their car and went without incident. All in all, I think EP probably learned a valuable lesson to park only where legally allowed. Although they probably had a headache of being without a car for the weekend, it ultimately was likely a better outcome than having their car towed and impounded, which is notoriously hard to go and retrieve in my area, especially on a holiday weekend. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm curious, have you ever dealt with entitled parkers? And if so, have you taught them a lesson? Let us know how it went in the comments, I would love to hear your story. Or even better, post it on r/Ripe Stories on Reddit. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. In the neighborhood I live in, there is a mandatory HOA, but there is kind of a loophole to this. You can be grandfathered in and because of that not have to join the HOA. Since it was formed a while back, almost every single person either joined or moved away, and their house then became HOA mandatory. Now, my parents were not members of the HOA, and one of the very few houses that still was grandfathered in and did not need to join. When they passed away though, they left the house to me, and since I was a direct descendant, I was able to keep the house under that clause and not have it be part of the HOA. Don't get me wrong, this did not stop them from trying to convince me that it would be better off if I just joined it. Also, since I was on the younger side, the HOA decided that they could try and trick me into thinking I had to join and the house was no longer under the loophole to not join. I did not fall for any of that and insisted that I didn't want to join and this home would remain free from the HOA. I've also read a ton of stories about there being a crazy HOA neighbor or something. For me, it was a little different because it seemed like everywhere I looked there was an entitled or crazy HOA busybody neighbor that wanted to bother me until I gave in and joined this damn HOA. I did not want to, and the more they tried to force it upon me, the more I wanted to push back and tell them to go shove it. If timing also couldn't be worse, I had just accepted for my master's program study, which happened to be overseas. I knew that if my parents were still alive, they would kill me if I gave up this opportunity for anything. Egged on by their voices in my head, I left to go study overseas while leaving the house basically empty until I came back. I had no mortgage on the house and already set things up for me to pay other things like taxes and having my mail forwarded to me. When I was working and studying, I kind of forgot about the house and all the entitled Garen neighbors that I had surrounding my home. Instead, I was going into almost a super focus with my work and study until the first year of my program was over and I had a few months off. I could have stayed, but I really wanted to head back home for those few months instead to see other family and some old friends. Checking to see if the house was fine did not even cross my mind, and that might just be due to me being young and a little naive. I got back home after my almost year away and unlocked my door ready to relax. I loved my program, don't get me wrong, but it was still school and having a few months with no papers or research sounded amazing. I was deeply disturbed to find that in what should have been my bedroom was one of the entitled HOA neighbors just sitting there. The house was not empty since I was not gonna move all the furniture with me, so she had made herself quite comfortable in my home. As some of you might also do, I reacted by screaming and almost giving myself a panic attack. Me, what are you doing in here? How did you get in my house? How long have you been here? The questions were flying and I don't even know if I wanted to hear any of the answers. I could not stop myself from just going on and on. HOA Karen, oh, I didn't think you were going to be back. It was such a waste to leave this house just sitting, so I decided to move in. Me, you cannot just decide to move into my house. Get the hell out of here now. HOA Karen, you think you're so smart, but I bet you know nothing about squatter rights. I have been here long enough that you legally cannot have me arrested and removed for trespassing. Me, I don't suppose you want to tell me why you moved into my house as a squatter. If I recall, you have your own perfectly good house just a few doors down. Seems kind of dumb to squat in a place that has no electric or gas for almost a year when you have your own place instead. HOA Karen, like I said, you know nothing. If I squat here long enough, I can claim that you abandoned this house and I took it over. Once I claim it, then it will have no choice but to become part of the HOA and I will be more than happy to sign those papers. After that, I don't really care what happens to the house. Maybe I can sell it and get myself a nice treat with the money. Me, there's no way I'm letting you steal my parents' home and sell it just out of spite. I will fight you in court until you don't have a dime left to your name if that is what it takes. I found a lawyer and found out that she was telling the truth about everything and me needing a plan to get her out. The first thing was to write and deliver a formal eviction notice even though she was not a tenant. It would serve almost the same purpose though, which is all that mattered to me. I was also filing a lawsuit against her for breaking into my house and squatting since I knew she wouldn't just go quietly. When the month for the eviction notice was up, I was finally allowed to have police come to the house and force her to leave. Of course, she knew this was coming and before she left, destroyed everything she could get her hands on. I was gonna add those damages to the lawsuit, so don't worry about that. In court, she was trying to claim that since she squatted at the house for nearly a year with me nowhere to be found, I had clearly abandoned it and she was claiming it. She was arguing that she was the rightful owner because of that and I should be stripped of the deed to the house. Since I went through proper channels to go study overseas, it was not considered abandoned. She did not think that she was gonna get in trouble for squatting, but the judge told her that with it on the rise, it's being seen as a more serious offense than in the past. She was facing a huge fine for that, not to mention the damage she had done to my house. She was found guilty, and while she avoided jail, she didn't evade having to pay massive fines and payouts for the squatting and damage she had done. I was always brought up to not really talk about exact amounts when it came to money. Let's just say that for the second year of studying overseas, I did not need to take out a student loan and could pay for it out of pocket because of this Karen. Also, don't worry about me leaving again because I made sure to have somebody watching my house for me this time, like I probably should have been from the start. I'm learning as I go how to own my home and really hope that nothing else comes close to the HOA neighbor that was trying to steal my house, all because I didn't want to be a part of the HOA. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.